James Roguski, I wanted to catch up with you because we're now against the clock with the World Health Assembly. It is happening from the 19th to the 26th of May. Where is this meeting happening and what is the thrust of it?
Well, the World Health Assembly, as opposed to the World Health Organization, meets once a year. All of the nations send their delegates and they meet in Geneva. And the World Health Assembly is supposed to be the governing body of the bureaucracy that is the World Health Organization. Well, over time, they only meet once a year, but the bureaucracy spends billions of dollars and they're in place all year long. So the control has shifted, much like it has in all of our governments, where our representative assemblies, our parliaments, our Congress or whatever, yes, they meet, but in this case, they only meet once a year. And the bureaucrats are left to run the show. They're supposed to be following the directions of the World Health Assembly, but in many ways, it seems like the cart is leading the horse. And so what we're dealing with here is a lot of secrecy in regards to the negotiations. And let me just dive right in, and I'll tell you what I think I know. I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't like to give people fake hopium, and get your hopes up too high. But what I've been observing over the last year is that they have been having great difficulty reaching agreement on something called the Pathogen Access and Benefit Sharing System. What that means is they want poor nations to expend billions of dollars looking for pathogens, using what I believe is fraudulent PCR tests to claim that they found some new pathogen, checking poultry operations or dairy farms or septic and wastewater treatment or hospitals or people or animals or whatever, looking for pathogens with pandemic potential that have the potential to turn a profit if they can be brought into the laboratory, analyzed, and then they claim, oh, we have a test for this, we have a drug for this, we have some kind of new mRNA, biological weapon to protect you from it. And they've been having great difficulty because the relatively poor nations don't have the money to be implementing all that technology. But when they hand over the genetic information, they want a piece of the pie. And that's what these negotiations have always been about. If you go all the way back to when Omicron showed up on the scene and South Africa and Botswana said, oh, look at what we have identified. They handed it over the way they thought they were supposed to. And then Pfizer and Moderna turned it into a couple of more $1 billion with the boosters. And that is really what these negotiations have always been about. The pathogen access and benefit sharing system. They want a share of the benefits. Well, months ago, they put into the negotiated agreement that, well, we're going to probably not be able to settle this. We'll put it in an annex to be determined later because it was just too many sticking points. It was too hard to negotiate. Well, they plowed along with all of the other, aspects of the agreement. And about a month or so ago, the negotiator said, oh, okay, literally, if you download the document that I recently published, it's all highlighted in neon green, right? Meaning, okay, we're all good. I'm wearing green. It's like they were in agreement as opposed to yellow or red. Well, there was this little thing that they put in there months ago that, okay, fine, you can put the pathogen access and benefit sharing system in Article 12.2 into its own separate annex, but we're not going to agree to any of this until everything is agreed. So what it seems like they're going to try to do is adopt, they're going to pretend to vote to adopt an agreement that has a stipulation in it that says, well, you can't sign the agreement until you agree to the pathogen access and benefit sharing system. So I got a leaked document this morning, I think it was, and what it says in there is that now they want to create an intergovernmental working group to negotiate this pathogen access and benefit sharing annex, and they're going to be going for the next year. Now, that's not really a surprise unless you haven't really been paying attention like I have. And so it seems like maybe, and I'm cautiously optimistic, they might agree and have a fake vote or a consensus vote, or they might, fall apart and totally disagree. But it looks like they're going to try to adopt an agreement that cannot yet be signed until they actually finish it. And it might take them a whole year, it might take them a half a year. They're going to get this intergovernmental working group to try to hash out the PABS agreement. And what that may very well give us is more time to just beat the living daylights out of the entire agreement, because all it is a corrupt business deal to funnel billions of dollars through this new bureaucracy to build out the business of pandemics. And, more manufacturing, more logistics and distribution, more pharmaceutical products, more drugs, more devices like ventilators, more biological weapon, injectable products. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that they're going to try to trick everybody into going, oh, we signed, we agreed to this pandemic agreement, but it's not finished, so nobody can actually sign it, and they can't actually implement it because they've got a lot more negotiating to do. And now is not the time to give up. Now is not the time to, be working on fear or hopium or anything in between. Now is the time to get to work and dive into what they claim to have agreed upon and understand it for the piece of crap that it is. Because they're not talking about making people healthier. They're talking about just giving billions of dollars to big pharma to build out more manufacturing capacity around the world so they can have, drugs and quite frankly, poisons and gene therapies and mRNA vaccines just falling off the shelves, that they refer to it as global public goods. They want them to be as ubiquitous as sunshine and the air that you breathe. And these are their words, right? That this is what they want this to be. And so the meeting is going to be happening, as you said, May 19th to the 27th. And I encourage people to pay attention. I suspect almost everybody is going to walk away completely confused. Like when you watch a murder mystery or, some kind of thriller and there's a plot twist at the end. Well, get ready for the plot twist. It's probably going to be confusing. There's going to be news reports from all kinds of sources saying this, that, and the other. I'm cautiously optimistic that they have actually failed to get to the finish line. And so now is not the time to sit back and relax. Now is the time to put the shoulder to the grindstone and expose this lousy, document for what it really, really is.
This is brilliant. We're going to post your Substack, which people can follow and see the parts of this if you want to get into it. I mean, I think I laughed because as dark as it is, you summed it up really well, this piece of crap. I mean, you can't have a legal agreement wherein massively important terms of the agreement have not been agreed upon. Right. It's not how contract law works. So it's all trickery. But just for people who feel a bit overwhelmed, who exactly, you're saying they want a share of the benefits. Who exactly are they? Who are the they?
These negotiations started, I mentioned Omicron and South Africa and Botswana identifying this genetic information. Well, there's laws going back to 1992 where biological information, if you think more about herbalism and indigenous wisdom with, natural healing with plants and so forth, there has been agreements that haven't really worked out very well, but they were trying to protect indigenous culture from having pharmaceutical companies come in, learn about the plants or whatever else, had healing properties, take that information, go turn it into pharmaceutical drugs, make billions of dollars, and not give any benefits in return. So there's an access and benefit sharing, concept in international law that they put a P in front of. It's not just plants and herbs, but it's pathogen access. So if you think about it, now there's a lot of craziness circulating around it, but how many billions of dollars were made based on the genetic sequence that was claimed to come out of Wuhan, right? Somebody said, oh, here's a bunch of letters. It identifies the genetic sequence of something that you should be very, 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 very afraid of and work to, deal with it. How many billions of dollars were made from that one little tiny piece of information? A data file, probably small enough you could email it to somebody, right? And so that type of knowledge, that type of, they literally talk about it as being a sovereign national resource. If they're going to hand over this money-making pathogen information, they want a piece of the pie. They want it in contract. You mentioned contracts. You're right, spot on. They want to have agreements in place. And here's what people in the United States need to understand. Just because Trump has started the process of exiting the WHO, that doesn't mean that all the pharmaceutical companies in the United States can't participate in the pathogen access and benefit sharing system. They're going to want access to those pathogens so they can turn a profit by making tests and drugs and jabs and everything else. So while our country is busy doing that on its own with our Defense Department and all of the biological weapons developments, labs and Moderna and Pfizer and everything else, what we're really looking at is the potential for a sort of Cold War scenario between the biological weapons research, development, and distribution arm of the Defense Department and the WHO version of that. And so to take that analogy a little bit further, when you look at all of the DOGE information looking into USAID, what the treaty or agreement is looking to do is something like WHO AID. They want to have billions of dollars flowing through this conference of the parties so they can dish it out to all kinds of what they call relevant stakeholders, all of the foundations and organizations that do something with that money, right? But mostly it's put it in their pocket and people don't end up healthier. They end up worse off because of it. And so what we're dealing with here is an attempt to put into, an international agreement a corrupt, money laundering, crony capitalism, quite frankly, fascist connection between government, industry, and the third leg of the new fascism, all of these relevant stakeholder non-government organizations who all want this agreement to go through because they're looking at the Framework Convention for Climate Change from 1992, which is now $1 trillion industry. They have a meeting once a year. They have a party, the Conference of the Parties. Tens of thousands of people get in their jets and fly all across the world to go talk about, saving the world from climate change. And now they're talking about funneling $1 trillion a year to save the planet. Well, all of the people who are busy saving the planet make a really nice income doing so. And the WHO would love to set up a similar organization for the Framework Convention for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. It's a money-making business if we allow them to set it up. And what we have to do is, people need to really understand that, what they're talking about is not herbs and vitamins and minerals and how you treat people. They didn't have any doctors talking about it. They're literally, if you look at the articles in the agreement, they're talking about surveillance, which means, looking at poultry operations and dairy farms and septic systems and all that, looking for pathogens. They're talking about the One Health approach, meaning, they're going to be looking at all the animals that people are raising and trying to find pathogens. They're talking about globally distributed means of production and manufacture. They want to be in charge of the logistics and distribution. And much of this is actually mirroring what a lot of people have completely forgotten about, but I haven't, which is on June 1st, 2024, they passed similar pieces of this puzzle in the amendments to the International Health Regulation. And the deadline for every nation on the planet to reject the 2024 amendments is coming up on July 19th. Well, they can't really agree to the pandemic agreement because a lot of countries hopefully will reject the amendments that the agreement relies on. It references, for definitions, but the most important thing is in the amendments is the coordinating financial mechanism. And there's a nearly identical version in the pandemic agreement. They want to be in charge of making the money flow through this organization to give contracts to put products in their storehouse. The United States, believe it or not, spends the equivalent of the entire WHO budget purchasing products to put in our national strategic stockpile to protect us against biological warfare. They spend $3.5 billion, the United States spends $3.5 billion a year buying God knows what, because it's classified. And sometimes they tell you, oh, we're going to do this, and, smallpox vaccines or anthrax or whatever it may be. It doesn't matter to them if they pull it out of the stockpile and actually inject it into people. They get paid to put it in the stockpile. And all of these products generally have a bit of an expiration date. So, 5-10 years later, got to replenish it. And if you can keep finding new things that potentially could be used as a biological weapon, the contracts keep being given out, and it's all done in quiet. Nobody really knows what's going on. And the WHO and all of the countries around the world and all of the relevant stakeholder non-government organizations, they see the gravy train. They want this to happen. They don't care about the health of people in the world. They see a very profitable business. And I learned this back in October, I think it was, of 2022, when the Indonesian health minister, who's a banker, was talking to the B20, and he said, he was talking about something related to all of this, the pandemic fund. And he said, they've got billions of dollars in the pandemic fund. Go invest. It's a great business opportunity.
Oh.
And that's what this has always been about.
And this is, as journalists, you and I both know, first rule of journalism, follow the money, and you will get to the story. And this is really just all about big pharma getting even bigger profits. And they've already made trillions out of this enormous pandemic rort that the world fell for. But here's the rub, James. People don't want jabs in their bodies. In growing millions around the world, people are saying, I don't want any more of any of these jabs. We've just put out a piece saying there is evidence, and it's come up in the Philippines, of there being nanotechnology in every single jab. And the hepatitis B one that's given to small babies now, they have found evidence of nanotechnology. So rightly so, people are going, you can keep your jabs, all of them, don't want a bar of it. So what we've got here is a very corrupt body, the World Health Organization, that in my view needs to be pulled down as quickly as possible. Yes, we have Trump saying I'll pull back from it, but what part can each of the people of the world play? Do I go to my local politician and say, you make sure that those international health regulations, the IHR, are not signed in for New Zealand, that New Zealand pulls out of that? Do I go and say, I want you as my government to insist that we pull out of the WHO? What are the steps the people who feel overwhelmed by the NGOs can do, James?
Well, first and foremost, realize that in the vast majority of nations, it is the head of state that is in charge of international agreements. And so just as Trump basically wrote a letter and said to the WHO, sayonara, we're leaving, okay, he has not yet said a word about exiting or rejecting the amendments to the international health regulations. It's just a letter. Just write a letter to the WHO, go, no, thank you, not for us. Well, most people, I certainly don't have Donald Trump's phone number on speed dial. Most people are not able to speak directly to the head of state, right? But they are the ones who make generally these decisions. Now, some nations, have parliamentary rules and they have to show documents to the parliament and maybe get a vote. It all depends. But it all starts with education. And so the misinformation about what has been going on with these negotiations has been amazing. The WHO still has not published an updated version of the agreement since May 27th, 2024. It's almost a full year. It's leaked out, and I've reported on it, and it's knowable, but it's not knowable because they are being transparent about it. They have been very, very hidden about it. They're currently working on negotiating the resolution that they're going to present to the World Health Assembly. Well, they have a rule in their basic rule book, their guiding paperwork, that all documentation that's going to be considered at the World Health Assembly is supposed to be available 6 weeks in advance of the meeting. Well, we're about a week away, and so many of the documents are nowhere to be found, not just the agreement, but everything else they're doing. So they clearly don't care about following their own rules. And, this is a problem. They did it last year. They did it 2 years before that. There's supposed to be deadlines. There's supposed to be transparency. There's supposed to be the possibility of public input. What nation around the planet has really, worked with their people saying, oh, we're working on a pandemic agreement, worldwide agreement. What are your opinions? Well, they started to do that 3 years ago in April. They gave 1 week notice, and they said, oh, we want people to give their comments. In 1 week, back in 2022 in April, we got 30-some thousand people to submit written comments, and 99.9% of them were, we don't want no stinking treaty. What we want is for them to truly, realize what we have all realized, is that the PCR test is a fraud.
Yes.
The devices like ventilators murdered people. Remdesivir destroyed people's kidneys and caused the death of untold numbers of people. And the jabs, whether it was AstraZeneca or Johnson & Johnson or Pfizer, Moderna, or any of them, have actually created a new pandemic, if you really want to talk about it, of all of the vaccine injured people that they just, don't want to look at, and they deny it. And so their solution is to pour billions of dollars into the types of things that harmed people. They didn't help anybody with any of the things that were used from Big Pharma. You know that, I know that, probably all your viewers know that. But the people who are, given the task of negotiating these agreements don't really care about us. They don't know who we are. They don't know what we feel. And they think we're the crazy ones. But they refuse to look at the evidence of the harm that all of these pharmaceutical interventions have caused, and they'll keep going until we just stop them. And so now is not the time to sit back and go, oh, okay, great, we got another year maybe. Now is the time to dig in, understand what they're trying to do, and realize that they have maybe, I'm cautiously optimistic, we'll see. They're probably going to put on a theatrical production, make it seem like they're just saving the world. And they got a little bit, they got to mop up some details. Well, we need to push even harder to destroy their false narrative filled with lies that pharmaceutical tests and drugs and devices and jabs, and they've also added gene therapies, right, to their list of pandemic-related products. We need to make it very clear that we are not having any of this. And, it takes everybody in the world to become a little bit more better informed and a lot louder. Speak up. Yes, one voice isn't going to stop it, but one voice, if it reaches more and it reaches more, now is not the time to be silent. Now is the time to really get loud.
And please share this around all your friends and your contacts, this interview, and have a look at James Roguski's Substack. I'm just so sick of NGOs. I'm so sick of international agreements. I'm so sick of anything large and centralized. I want decentralization. I want all the international agreements thrown out because they're not serving the people. And I certainly am over being fearful about pandemics. I'd rather have anything, even a pandemic, an actual pandemic, rather than the World Health Organization. Do you think that it will fall? Is it getting wobbly? There are those who say the World Economic Forum is looking becoming very wobbly. And that's one of the reasons Klaus Schwab has gone out the back door. Schwab's daughter is now singing like a canary and talking about the very evil things that the WEF has been doing. So do you think we're winning there? Do you think these international oppressive organizations are starting to wobble, James?
I try to not make any kind of predictions. I try to not prognosticate what's going on, with other people. When I wake up in the morning, what I focus on is what can I do?
Nice.
Okay. And if exposing them or spreading the word about other people exposing them, it's like, if you imagine, they talk about these atmospheric rivers, right, where large amounts of moisture are flowing through the atmosphere, and they get maybe into a mountain range and it starts to turn to rain. Well, one little raindrop, no big deal, okay? But if billions and trillions and quadrillions of raindrops, start speaking up, if you start speaking up, you have this flood of truth, and they're not going to be able to hold back. The dam is breaking, but we just got to keep speaking our truth. And so what happens to them is a function of what happens within each one of us. So look in the mirror when you go to, just before you go to sleep at night, and ask yourself, did I do something today to make the world a better place? Did I do something to speak some truth out there? Or are you just churning your gears, watching the mainstream media and getting distracted by everything else under the sun that you can't really do anything about? You can reach out to your local politicians and let them know what they need to know. And, they're getting their information from wherever they're getting it. And if you're not talking directly to them, they're not hearing it from you. So, if you live in any kind of a country where there's a representative democracy element, and these people are supposed to be representing you, how can they represent you if you don't speak up?
That's beautiful. And so, my neighbor Mary booked in with her local representative. It took her a whole month. It took a lot of work to get to see that person. He was very reluctant, but he did sit around a table. And she said, what do I say? And I suggested printing off some of these pieces so you can hand that representative information, James. I'm just going to refer to some of your sites, stoptheglobalagenda.com. maskcharade.com. That's all about the ridiculous ineffectiveness and dangers of mask wearing. PCRfraud.com is another of James' sites. cullingismurder.com. All of those sites and your Substack people can go on. You can print off facts and you can present them to your local representative and demand that they do not sign this.
Specifically for the WHO, you can go to rejectthetreaty.com. Yes. And rejecttheamendments.com. Or, as I always do, you can give me a phone call. I'm in the United States. If you're outside the country, you can use Signal or Telegram or WhatsApp. It's all the same. James Roguski, 310-619-3055 if you have any questions. Now is, maybe a turning point. Like I said, I'm cautiously optimistic because they always seem to pull a plot twist at the end. But, it looks like my role in this ongoing soap opera, as the World Health Organization turns, it looks like I got picked up for another season. It seems like they're going to try for the next year to negotiate this PABS agreement. And I see that as an opportunity to expose the ridiculousness of the entire idea that what we need to protect the world from the next pandemic is more biological weapons to harm people. It's just absurd. And they, for whatever reason, cannot see it, that they just see it from their own point of view. They think the jabs are great. They think all the drugs and the treatments and everything that were done, they can't even begin to question it. And, that is a certain type of blindness, but it is coupled with, money signs, dollar signs in their eyes, because if they can get governments to agree to this and have the WHO put the good housekeeping seal of approval on treatments for pathogens that have pandemic potential, they can still get contracts to put products in the stockpile. in case there's something in the future. They don't have to declare that there's actually a pandemic. They can say, well, it's got the potential to be a pandemic, so we got to spend the money anyways. And, that's just corruption. That's just greed. That's just horrific. And we need to get people around the world to see it, call it for what it is, and shut it down.
It's so inspiring, James. Let's talk to you again between the 19th and the 27th of May this year. Let's talk to you about what happens at this World Health. Yeah. And then we also want to follow up in a future interview on the PrEP Act work that you're doing. James Roguski, valuable work you do to help us all know the truth and take our own steps in our own countries. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Liz.